The night was quiet, the kind of stillness that makes even the smallest sound echo like a secret waiting to be told. But behind the closed doors of a Montecito mansion, tension was building, and the kind of silence that follows a storm was beginning to crack. Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, believed she had her past under control. She had presented herself as a woman reborn, someone who had closed the chapters of her early life, rewritten the narrative, and stepped into a story of royal glamour and international influence. But what happens when a ghost from the past refuses to remain buried? What happens when a man from her past turns up, not quietly, but at her very front door, carrying with him truths she thought were long erased? That man was Trevor Engelson, Meghan's former husband, the Hollywood producer who had once shared her dreams and her life. To the public, Trevor was the first husband she had left behind. To Meghan, he was a chapter that needed to be forgotten, smoothed over, and buried beneath the glittering fairy tale of marrying a prince. But Trevor's arrival was not just about rehashing a failed marriage. This was about something bigger. It was about secrets Meghan never wanted Harry, or the world, to know. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Imagine the scene. Meghan, poised, accustomed to controlling her narrative, answering a knock at the door only to be confronted by Trevor, a man she never expected to see again face to face. And with him, not bitterness alone, but revelations. Words that would cut through her carefully constructed image like a blade through silk. What Trevor revealed was not merely about their divorce, but about what came before him. A first marriage, a hidden union in her early 20s in Los Angeles, and worse, an alleged child. For Meghan, the walls she had built around her past weren't just crumbling. They were shattering into dust at her feet. The public knows Meghan as the actress who starred in Suits, the humanitarian who charmed a prince, and the woman who dared to step away from the royal family. But rarely does anyone speak of the Meghan before all of that. The young woman navigating Hollywood's unforgiving ladder, the hustler who scraped by in auditions and waited tables, the ambitious dreamer who always had her eyes on something bigger. Yet, hidden within those years are pieces of her life she never wanted to resurface. Pieces that Trevor now seemed determined to lay bare. The power of this story lies not just in the revelation itself, but in what it means. Imagine Harry, a man who sacrificed his royal identity, who cut ties with his family, who defended Meghan against every critic, now being confronted with a truth that makes him question everything. What would it feel like for Harry to hear, not from Meghan herself, but from another man, that the woman he thought he knew inside and out had lived an entirely different life before him? A marriage erased, a child hidden, a betrayal that could fracture trust beyond repair. But let's pause for a moment and step back into Meghan's early 20s, the world where these secrets were born. Picture a young Meghan, in Los Angeles, still years away from fame, still just another hopeful face in the crowded hallways of casting calls. She was charming, ambitious, sharp, traits that attracted people to her instantly. In that stage of life, she met someone. Not Trevor, not Harry, but the man who, according to Trevor's revelation, became her first husband. The details of this marriage have long been buried, scrubbed from public records, shielded from curious journalists, but Trevor's claim suggests it was real, binding, and significant. And if that marriage produced a child, the implications are even more staggering. Secrets have a way of echoing louder the longer they're hidden. For Meghan, every red carpet smile, every magazine cover, every royal appearance came with the silent knowledge of what she had left behind. Did she believe it would never surface? Did she believe Trevor, the man who knew her so well, would stay silent forever? The truth is, silence can be bought, begged, or bargained for, but it rarely lasts forever. Especially when emotions like betrayal and resentment linger in the shadows. Trevor's arrival at Meghan's door wasn't just about the past, it was about timing. Why now? Why after so many years? Was it guilt? Was it anger? Or was it the realization that the world deserved to know the truth? More importantly, why confront Meghan directly, instead of leaking the story to the press first? His decision to stand there, in person, face to face, makes the moment more dramatic, more raw. It wasn't about headlines. It was about truth. And when truth arrives uninvited, it never knocks softly. This confrontation sets the stage for one of the most gripping conflicts imaginable, not just between Meghan and Trevor, but between Meghan and Harry, between Meghan and the image she has carefully built. This isn't just a tabloid scandal. It's an existential threat to her identity, her credibility, her marriage, and her future. The woman who once accused the palace of silencing her now faces the silence of her own making, the silence of a secret past. And think of Harry, blindsided. Imagine his face as he listens to Trevor's words. The man who gave up his life as a working royal, who endured mockery and estrangement, who defended Meghan at every turn, suddenly learning that she may not have been fully honest about her past. For Harry, this isn't about Meghan's choices before they met. It's about the trust that binds them now. A marriage without honesty is a house without foundation. And in that moment, as Trevor speaks, Harry begins to feel the cracks beneath his feet. But this story is not simply about betrayal. It's about consequences. It's about how buried truths, no matter how deeply hidden, eventually claw their way to the surface. Meghan's carefully curated narrative is now colliding with her reality. The Netflix deals, the brand partnerships, the speeches about authenticity and empowerment. Suddenly, all of it hangs under the shadow of this revelation. The woman who told the world to speak your truth is now being accused of hiding hers. This is not just Meghan's fight anymore. It's Harry's, too. It's the royal families who will watch this scandal unfold from a distance, perhaps with a sense of vindication. It's the publics who will judge, speculate, and debate every detail. And it's Trevor's, who may finally feel liberated by speaking a truth he has carried for too long. The introduction to this story must leave us here, on the edge of revelation. Meghan at her doorstep, Trevor standing there like a shadow from the past, Harry caught between loyalty and betrayal. The air thick with tension, the silence louder than words. A secret marriage, a hidden child, a truth that could undo everything. And yet, we don't know the full story. Not yet. Because the truth is never as simple as the first telling. What did Meghan do in her 20s that she wanted erased? Who was this first husband? What became of the alleged child? And most importantly, why has it all resurfaced now, at this very moment when Meghan and Harry's future already seems uncertain? Not at the royal palaces, not in the spotlight of Netflix cameras, but in the dusty streets and restless nights of Los Angeles in the early 2000s. To understand the magnitude of Trevor Engelson's revelations, one must go back to who Meghan was before the fame, before the royal title, before the world knew her name. She was a young woman in her early 20s, ambitious, restless, determined to make her mark in a city that chews up dreamers and spits them out. Yet within those formative years lay the roots of a story so carefully buried that even those closest to her later in life never saw it coming. Picture Los Angeles at that time, buzzing with opportunity and disappointment in equal measure. Casting calls filled dingy offices, young actors lined up under hot lights praying for a callback, and the air was thick with the scent of ambition. Meghan was among them, a bright, determined face with a spark that made her stand out. She wasn't famous, not even close, but she was hungry. Every step she took was calculated. Every handshake meant something. Every connection mattered. But the Meghan of those days wasn't the flawless, curated duchess the world would come to know. She was human, vulnerable, shaped by a longing for belonging and a desire to be someone. It was during this period that she met a man who would become, according to Trevor's startling words, her first husband. He was older, more experienced, and in many ways represented stability. For a young woman hustling in a city that thrives on illusion, that stability must have been intoxicating. Their relationship moved quickly, as such unions often do in the haze of youthful passion and whispered promises. They laughed together, shared dreams, leaned on each other in the kind of way two people clinging to survival often do. For Meghan, it wasn't just about romance. It was about finding a partner in a city where everyone seemed to be out for themselves. Marriage came not with fanfare, but with secrecy. No tabloids, no photographs, no elaborate ceremonies. Just a quiet vow exchanged away from the glaring lights of Hollywood. It was, in many ways, the opposite of the life she would later live. Private, intimate, and unrecorded in the public eye. And perhaps that is why Meghan believed she could erase it. For in her mind, If the world never knew it happened, maybe it didn't. But life does not bend to wishful thinking, and the truth, no matter how deeply buried, leaves a trail. The question that looms is why Meghan chose to keep this chapter hidden. Was it shame? Was it the fear that her youthful decisions would one day undermine her carefully crafted persona? Or was it something deeper, something connected to the whispers of a child born during that time? These are the questions that Trevor hinted at when he came forward, and they form the backbone of the mystery that now surrounds Meghan's past. Her 20s were not just about auditions and rejections. They were about forging an identity, building a life brick by brick. In those years, Meghan was not yet the polished royal she became. She was a young woman trying to navigate the pitfalls of love, career, and ambition. She took risks, made mistakes, and sought shortcuts where she could. And it was in those missteps, those private vows, that the seeds of a future scandal were sown. For those who knew Meghan back then, she was magnetic. Friends described her as both charming and calculating, someone who could light up a room, but also had an intensity about her that suggested she was always thinking 3 steps ahead. That kind of personality wins allies quickly, but it also creates tension. To some, Meghan was the friend who cheered you on, who pushed you to chase bigger dreams. To others, she was someone who seemed to be playing a game no one else fully understood. And yet, the first marriage remained a secret even among her circles. It was as though Meghan herself compartmentalized her life. Auditions in the morning, waitressing shifts in the evening, and a marriage that few, if any, outside of her immediate orbit were aware of. To the outside world, she was single, ambitious, independent. But behind closed doors, she was a wife. And if the rumors Trevor hinted at are true, perhaps even a mother. This duplicity would come to define Meghan's approach to life in the years that followed. She understood, even then, that image was everything. Hollywood didn't care about who you were. It cared about who you appeared to be. A young actress with a husband and a child may not have fit the narrative she wanted to project, a narrative of independence, availability, and upward mobility. So, slowly, the reality of her life faded into silence. Documents disappeared. Stories went untold. And by the time she entered Trevor's life years later, it was as if that first marriage had never existed. But the past has a way of finding its voice. And Trevor, the man who was supposed to be her first husband but now reveals he was the second, has shattered that illusion. In Chapter 1 of this story, what we see most clearly is the foundation of Meghan's ambition and the choices she made to protect it. She was not yet a duchess, not yet a global icon, but already she understood the power of narrative and the necessity of control. This was the Meghan who learned early that in order to rise, you sometimes had to leave things behind, even people. And that is where the moral tension lies. Was Meghan simply doing what anyone in her position would do, protecting herself, chasing her dream, refusing to let the past hold her down? Or was she weaving a web of deception so intricate that even those closest to her would one day be ensnared by it? The introduction left us at her doorstep, Trevor arriving like a ghost. But here, in Chapter 1, we understand what gave that ghost its power. It wasn't just Trevor's words. It was the life Meghan had already lived, the marriage already made, the child allegedly brought into this world before Harry ever entered the picture. And with that understanding, we move closer to the heart of the scandal, closer to the unraveling of the image Meghan worked so tirelessly to create, with the kind of silence that surrounds secrets too heavy to carry openly. In the early 2000s, Meghan was not yet a household name, but she had already crafted the beginnings of a story she wanted the world to see. Outwardly, she was the young actress hustling through auditions, waiting tables to pay the bills, smiling her way through casting offices in Los Angeles. Inwardly, though, there was another narrative running parallel to the one she projected, a story of intimacy, promises, and a marriage that would later become the subject of whispers Trevor Engelson claims Meghan never wanted anyone to hear about. This was the secret first marriage, the union that Meghan allegedly buried so deep in her past that even Prince Harry himself may never have suspected its existence. To understand the gravity of this hidden chapter, imagine the moment a young woman, barely into her 20s, finds herself swept up in something more serious than she anticipated. She wasn't yet famous, not yet tied to royalty, but she already possessed that rare magnetism that drew people in. He was someone older, perhaps wiser, with a presence that gave her the sense of stability she longed for in a world filled with uncertainty. For Meghan, living in a city defined by competition and rejection, that kind of grounding presence must have felt like a lifeline. What started as companionship grew into something more binding. And before long, vows were exchanged, not in the glare of cameras, but in the quiet shadow of anonymity. There were no headlines announcing the wedding, no glossy photos in magazines, no Hollywood stars among the guests. It was a marriage meant to be lived, not displayed, and that in itself made it very different from the life Meghan would later pursue. It is said to have been modest, quiet, and in some ways rushed, a decision fueled by youth, passion, and perhaps the desire to hold on to something secure while everything else in life felt precarious. Yet, the absence of cameras did not make it any less real. A marriage is a legal, binding commitment, and if Trevor is correct, this was the commitment Meghan chose to hide when she reinvented herself later. The secrecy around this first marriage invites questions. Why erase it? Why not acknowledge it as part of her journey, just another step on the winding road of life? The answer lies in ambition. Meghan had a vision of who she wanted to be, and in that vision, there was no room for mistakes, for missteps, for chapters that did not align with the story she wanted to sell. A hidden first marriage might have complicated the carefully curated image of a woman climbing her way up from obscurity to global relevance. Worse, it might have suggested that her eventual union with Trevor Engelson, and later with Prince Harry, was not as unique or fairy tale-like as the world believed. One of the most startling parts of Trevor's revelations is the suggestion that Meghan's secrecy extended beyond the marriage itself. Whispers of a child born during that time add an even darker shadow to the tale. If true, it would explain the lengths Meghan may have gone to in erasing this chapter of her life. A marriage can be dissolved, annulled, or simply hidden in silence. But a child is a living testament, a permanent reminder, and one that cannot be erased as easily as a name removed from paperwork. For Meghan, who built her image on independence, reinvention, and later motherhood on her own terms, the existence of a hidden child would not only contradict her story, but potentially destroy it. The alleged first husband remains an enigma in this story. Who was he? Why has his identity never been brought forward in full detail? Perhaps he was a man outside the sphere of fame, someone who preferred to remain out of the spotlight, someone who had no interest in chasing headlines. Or perhaps the silence around his name was part of Meghan's own effort to keep this chapter closed. What matters more is not who he was, but what his existence represents. If Trevor's words are to be believed, Meghan's first marriage was not only real but defining, shaping how she would handle relationships, secrets, and ambition in the years to come. Her decision to bury this truth reflects a larger pattern that would follow Meghan throughout her life, the constant reshaping of identity. She was not content to be simply a struggling actress. She wanted to be seen as someone extraordinary. Every step forward was paired with a revision of the past. Each reinvention required that something be cut away, silenced, or forgotten. In her 20s, that meant erasing a husband. Later, it might have meant softening details of her marriage to Trevor when she entered the royal spotlight. And now, it means managing the narrative of her marriage to Harry while critics and biographers dig relentlessly into her history. The alleged child makes this even more complicated. If such a child exists, where are they now? Did they grow up quietly, far away from the scrutiny of Hollywood and royalty? Were they shielded deliberately from Meghan's rise to fame? Or were they removed entirely from her narrative through distance or secrecy? The emotional weight of such a revelation is staggering. It raises questions not only about Meghan's choices, but also about the consequences of ambition. How much of herself was she willing to sacrifice to become who she wanted the world to see? And at what cost? This is not to say Meghan was unique in this. Hollywood is filled with stories of reinvention, of stars who change their names, erase their pasts, and construct new lives from scratch. But Meghan's case is different because of what came later. She did not just become a television actress. She became a duchess. She entered a world where every detail of her past mattered, where the press and the palace alike would scour every record, every rumor, every whisper. And yet, according to Trevor, Even in that intense glare, this marriage and child remained hidden. That fact alone suggests an extraordinary effort to control the narrative, to erase the past so completely that it became a ghost no one dared mention, until Trevor himself chose to speak. Chapter 2, then, is about more than just a secret marriage. It is about the shaping of an identity, the deliberate concealment of a truth, and the lengths to which someone will go to build the life they imagine for themselves. Meghan's 20s were not just a time of struggle and ambition. They were a time of decisions that would echo for decades. Decisions that now threaten to resurface and undo everything she has built. The revelation of this first marriage casts Meghan's entire journey in a different light. It reframes her later relationship with Trevor Engelson, raising the question of whether he ever knew the full truth. It casts a shadow over her marriage to Harry, making one wonder what else has been left unsaid. And it forces us, the observers, to question the nature of ambition itself. How far is too far when chasing the life you want? Can a person truly erase their past, or will it always find a way to return? With the heaviest claim of all, the existence of a hidden child. For years, Meghan has presented herself as a woman who only became a mother with Archie and Lilibet, building much of her public image around her role as a modern mother balancing the weight of family, fame, and criticism. But Trevor's words hint at something different. That Meghan's experience with motherhood may have begun long before she met Harry, long before she even walked down the aisle with Trevor. If true, this revelation changes everything. It shifts the timeline of her life. It reshapes the narrative she has shared with the world, and it calls into question the very foundation of her honesty with those closest to her. The idea of a hidden child is both powerful and devastating. For Meghan, who has often spoken about family, about generational trauma, about the desire to create a safe home for her children, the thought that she might have chosen to distance herself from an earlier child is a contradiction so stark that it demands explanation. But how could something so monumental be kept a secret for so long? The answer lies in the intersection of ambition and fear. A young actress in her 20s, still struggling to gain recognition, may have seen a child not as a blessing she could openly share, but as a complication. A child could slow down her pursuit of roles. It could make her appear less marketable to casting directors who preferred their ingenues unattached. And so, if Trevor's claims are true, Meghan may have made the painful choice to separate that part of her life from the persona she projected. Imagine the complexity of emotions in such a situation. On one hand, there is love, the undeniable bond between a mother and child. On the other, there is ambition, the relentless drive to become someone greater than her circumstances. For Meghan, ambition was not just about success, it was about survival. She had watched her peers fade into obscurity, had seen the cruel indifference of Hollywood toward those who couldn't keep up. To her, protecting her dream may have felt like the only way to protect herself. But ambition always has a cost, and if this secret child is real, then the cost was immeasurable. There are whispers that this child was raised away from Meghan's rising fame, perhaps under the care of the father, or shielded entirely from the public eye. If that is the case, the secrecy would have been easier to maintain. A man outside the spotlight, uninterested in media attention, could have kept the child's life separate, away from the chaos that Meghan's story would one day become. But what happens when that child grows older? What happens when questions are asked? When curiosity about identity becomes impossible to silence? The existence of such a child would not only change Meghan's personal story, but also her public one. Every interview, every speech about motherhood, every photograph of her holding Archie or Lilibet would be re-examined through the lens of omission. For Harry, who has so fiercely defended his wife, the discovery of a hidden child would feel like more than a secret. It would feel like betrayal. Not because of the child's existence. Harry has always been empathetic toward complex family stories, but because he was never told. Honesty is the foundation of intimacy, and the withholding of such a truth would shake the trust he placed in her. And then there is the royal family. For an institution built on lineage and bloodlines, the existence of an unacknowledged child would not just be a personal issue, it would be a scandal. It would raise uncomfortable questions about Meghan's transparency before entering the royal fold, about what the palace knew or didn't know, and about whether Harry himself was blindsided. Imagine the whispers in Buckingham Palace corridors, the late-night phone calls, the strategists scrambling to determine how such a revelation could be contained. But the most poignant part of this chapter is not the palace or the press. It is the human element, the child at the center of it all. A person born into circumstances they did not choose, living a life possibly shaped by secrecy and silence. What would it feel like to watch your mother rise to international fame, to see her celebrated on magazine covers, only to know you were not part of that story? Would it feel like abandonment? Would it feel like erasure? Or would it feel like protection, a decision made to shield you from the crushing weight of public scrutiny? These questions are as haunting as they are unanswerable, and they give this chapter of Meghan's life a tragic undertone that cannot be ignored. Trevor's decision to bring this to light adds another layer. If he knew of this child, why speak now? Was it out of anger, a desire to hurt Meghan by revealing her deepest secret? Or was it out of conscience, a belief that truth should no longer be hidden? Either way, his words carry weight because they come from someone who once shared her life, who was close enough to know the things others never could. And in speaking them aloud, Trevor has shifted the entire narrative. This chapter forces us to see Meghan not just as a duchess, not just as an actress, but as a woman who has lived a life far more complex than she admits. It forces us to ask what we would do in her place. Would we sacrifice the truth for the sake of ambition? Would we distance ourselves from the past to protect the future? And can a person truly outrun the consequences of choices made in their youth? As the story unfolds, the alleged child becomes the most haunting part of Trevor's revelations. It is not just about Meghan's past. It is about the choices that ripple forward, touching lives in ways she may have never anticipated. It is about the pain of secrecy, the burden of silence, and the inevitability of truth. For Meghan, the existence of this child, if true, represents the one secret she could never completely erase, the one chapter of her life that refuses to stay buried. And for Harry, hearing this from Trevor's lips at the front door of his home, it is the moment where his world tilts. The woman he thought he knew has suddenly become a stranger, her life story rewritten in front of his eyes. The trust he placed in her is now fractured, and the family he thought he was building is overshadowed by the family she may have left behind. With a shift in perspective, because to fully understand how these revelations exploded into Meghan's present, one must first sit inside the mind and heart of Trevor Engelson. For years he had remained largely silent, painted by the press as the man Meghan left behind, the producer ex-husband whose story was overshadowed by the grandeur of her royal marriage. But Trevor was not a footnote, not merely a name buried in Meghan's biography. He was a man who had lived with her, loved her, and carried the weight of their history in silence. And now, with his decision to confront Meghan directly, his perspective takes center stage. Trevor's marriage to Meghan was supposed to be his great love story. He was established in Hollywood, carving out a reputation as a producer, while Meghan was a young actress finding her place. Theirs was a partnership built on shared ambition. He admired her drive, her charisma, her hunger to succeed. And she admired his ability to open doors, to introduce her to people who mattered in an industry where connections were currency. On the surface, they looked like a couple destined to rise together, one complementing the other. But underneath that polished exterior lay cracks that would widen with time. Friends of Trevor describe him as loyal, easygoing, and supportive. He was not the kind of man to seek the spotlight, preferring to work behind the scenes, to build quietly. Meghan, by contrast, was relentless, her ambitions sharper, her needs more consuming. Trevor loved her, but he often found himself orbiting around her desires, bending to accommodate her vision of the future. At first, he accepted it as part of who she was. But slowly, he began to see the sacrifices demanded of him, sacrifices that chipped away at the foundation of their marriage. The real fracture, Trevor has suggested in private, came not simply from Meghan's hunger for fame, but from her ability to rewrite her own history. By the time they married, Trevor began to notice the silences, the stories left unfinished, the moments where Meghan's past seemed to blur into vagueness. He accepted what she told him, but doubts lingered. Why was she so guarded about certain years of her life? Why did she avoid mentioning particular people? These were questions he learned not to ask, because Meghan had a way of shutting down conversations she did not want to have. And Trevor, like many men in love, chose to trust rather than pry. When their marriage ended, Trevor was devastated. He had given her his loyalty, his love, and years of his life, only to be cast aside as Meghan's ambitions shifted. To outsiders, it was simply another Hollywood breakup, a marriage that couldn't withstand the pressures of two demanding careers. But to Trevor, it was something deeper. A betrayal of trust, a confirmation of the unease he had always felt about the gaps in Meghan's story. He left the marriage carrying not only heartbreak, but also the weight of secrets he believed the world deserved to know. For years he stayed quiet, even as Meghan's star rose higher. He watched her become a duchess, watched the world fall under her spell, watched her redefine herself as a symbol of independence and resilience. He said nothing when people painted him as irrelevant, when his name was dragged into articles only to serve as a contrast to Harry's. Perhaps part of him wanted to move on. Perhaps part of him still hoped that silence would spare him the circus of media attention. But silence is heavy, and silence can eventually curdle into something darker. Trevor's decision to finally speak, first to Meghan, then indirectly to Harry, was not born overnight. It was the culmination of years of watching a narrative unfold that he knew was incomplete, years of biting his tongue, while the woman he once loved omitted entire chapters of her life. To him, the secret first marriage and the alleged child were not just rumors. They were truths buried under layers of spin. And as Meghan's influence grew, as she spoke about authenticity and honesty, Trevor felt the hypocrisy sharpen into something he could no longer bear. The scene at Meghan's front door, then, was more than confrontation. It was catharsis. For Trevor, it was the moment of release after years of restraint. Imagine his thoughts as he stood there, knowing that behind that door was a woman who had once been his partner in everything, now living a life he barely recognized. Did he hesitate? Did he wonder if this was the right decision? Or did the years of silence fuel him with such resolve that there was no turning back? His knock was not just a sound on a door. It was the echo of unfinished business, the reverberation of truths demanding to be heard. And when Meghan opened that door, Trevor saw not just the Duchess, not just the woman the world idolized or vilified, but the Meghan he once knew. The Meghan who laughed with him over late-night dinners, who shared her fears when auditions went badly, who leaned on him when the world felt too heavy. That memory collided with the present reality, where she stood as a global figure, insulated by fame, guarded by her new life. The distance between who she had been and who she had become must have struck him as both surreal and tragic. His perspective also adds depth to the question of motive. Was Trevor driven by revenge? Was this confrontation a way to wound Meghan as she once wounded him? Or was it, as he might claim, a pursuit of justice, a belief that the truth should not be erased, that the world deserved honesty from someone who wielded so much influence? Perhaps it was both. Human motives are rarely pure, and in Trevor's case, the blend of personal pain and moral conviction created a storm that could no longer be contained. For the audience, stepping into Trevor's shoes is essential. It transforms the story from a one-sided scandal into a multifaceted tragedy. Meghan is not just the woman caught in a lie. She is also the woman who once shared a marriage, who once had someone believe in her. Trevor is not just the scorned ex-husband. He is also the man who carried her secrets, who lived in the shadows of her ambition, who now chooses to step into the light. Their shared history gives weight to every word he speaks, because it comes not from speculation, but from lived experience. With a sense of inevitability, secrets never stay buried forever, and Trevor Engelson's decision to step forward was the culmination of years of silence breaking apart under the weight of truth. What makes this chapter so explosive is not only what Trevor revealed, but why he chose this moment, after years of distance, to finally confront Meghan face-to-face. It wasn't a tabloid leak, it wasn't a whispered rumor, it was a deliberate act of standing at her front door, demanding she acknowledge the truths she had long erased. For Trevor, the breaking point was not one single event, but a slow accumulation of frustration and disillusionment. He had watched Meghan transform her image again and again, rising higher with each reinvention. He had stayed silent while she was celebrated for her honesty, her authenticity, her courage to speak out against the monarchy and the press. But to Trevor, that public image was built on foundations that were not only shaky but dishonest. When Meghan spoke of being silenced, Trevor remembered the times she silenced her own past. When she spoke of motherhood, Trevor recalled whispers of the child that came before. Each speech, each headline, each carefully crafted interview only deepened his sense that the truth had been deliberately buried. But why now? Why after so many years of quiet? Some suggest it was timing. Meghan and Harry's brand had begun to falter, their deals questioned, their popularity tested. For Trevor, this might have felt like the moment when the world was finally ready to listen, when his words would not be drowned out by adoration or royal fascination. Others believe it was more personal, that Trevor had reached a stage in his own life where silence no longer felt like a burden he could carry. Whether out of conscience, anger, or a need for closure, he chose action over restraint. The breaking point may also have come from watching Harry himself. To see Meghan's new husband defend her so fiercely, to watch him sacrifice family, duty, and reputation for her, may have sparked something in Trevor. Perhaps he believed Harry deserved the truth, that he should know the woman he had built his life around was not the woman she claimed to be. The thought of Harry standing in ignorance while Meghan continued to shape a false narrative might have been intolerable. And so Trevor made the choice to go directly to the source, to say the words himself, to strip away the layers of secrecy once and for all. The act of showing up at Meghan's home is symbolic. He could have given an interview, could have leaked documents, could have whispered to journalists. But instead, he went to her doorstep. This was not just about exposure. It was about confrontation. It was about looking her in the eye, forcing her to see him, and forcing her to hear truths she had tried so hard to silence. That personal choice gives the moment its gravity. A leak can be dismissed as gossip, an article brushed aside as speculation. But a man from your past standing on your doorstep cannot be so easily ignored. For Meghan, this was a nightmare scenario. She had built her entire adult life on controlling the narrative, on managing what the world saw and what it didn't. Her team could spin headlines, could bury stories, could drown out critics with new distractions. But they could not control Trevor standing in front of her, holding words like weapons. In that moment, she was no longer the Duchess, no longer the powerful public figure. She was simply Meghan, a woman confronted with the past she had denied. And for Harry, this was the moment the illusion cracked. To see his wife confronted not by strangers, but by someone who had once shared her life forced him to question everything. Trevor's presence made it real. This wasn't the palace spinning stories. It wasn't the British press attacking Meghan. It was a man who had no reason to lie, who had nothing to gain from reappearing except the release of truth. For Harry, that must have been shattering. The breaking point also reveals something deeper about Trevor's character. He wasn't only speaking for himself. He was speaking for the silenced parts of Meghan's life, for the truth she had abandoned. Whether one sees him as a man seeking revenge or as someone unburdening his conscience, his decision was transformative. It changed the trajectory of Meghan's story, it redefined her marriage, and it reshaped the public's understanding of who she was. At the heart of Chapter 5 is the question of timing. Why does truth emerge when it does? Sometimes it is chance, sometimes it is design, and sometimes it is the inevitable collapse of walls that were never strong enough to hold. For Meghan, the timing could not have been worse. For Trevor, it could not have been better. And for Harry, it could not have been more devastating. Is where the storm finally breaks. The confrontation between Trevor Engelson, Meghan Markle, and Prince Harry is not just a clash of personalities, but a collision of past and present, of buried secrets meeting unshakable loyalty. The air is thick with tension, the kind that comes when truth is no longer a whisper, but a shout. Imagine the scene. Meghan opening her front door, expecting perhaps a delivery, a guest, or one of the many moving parts of her carefully organized life, only to find Trevor standing there. His presence alone is enough to jolt her. He is not supposed to exist in her world anymore. He is the man she left behind, the man she buried along with the pieces of herself she wanted forgotten. Yet here he was, flesh and blood, ready to undo everything. The first words matter most in moments like this, and Trevor knew it. He didn't arrive to exchange pleasantries. He arrived to cut through years of silence with a truth sharp enough to wound. Meghan, always composed in public, found her face tighten, her instinct to control faltering in the presence of a man who knew her too well. For Trevor, the act of speaking was less about anger and more about release. He laid out the words like evidence in a courtroom. The secret first marriage, the child, the omissions that had shaped Meghan's public image into something incomplete, perhaps even fraudulent. Harry, hearing these words, was caught between disbelief and recognition. This wasn't a headline, wasn't the sneering press he had spent years condemning. It was a man who had shared Meghan's life in ways Harry never could. For Harry, the weight of Trevor's words did not rest only in their content, but in their credibility. Trevor wasn't speculating, he was recounting. And the look on Meghan's face, the silence that stretched too long before she spoke, only deepened the gravity of what he heard. The confrontation itself was not a shouting match. That is what makes it all the more devastating. It wasn't chaos, it was clarity. Trevor spoke with the calm determination of someone who had carried the truth for too long. Meghan responded not with denial but with hesitation, her words careful, her tone measured, as though she knew each syllable might either save or destroy her. Harry asked questions, his voice breaking the rhythm, desperate for explanations that didn't come quickly enough. In this moment, Meghan faced the collapse of her greatest skill, the ability to control the narrative. With cameras, she could pose. With interviews, she could steer. With friends, she could curate what they knew. But with Trevor, she could not erase what he had lived. He knew the unedited version of her story, and in front of Harry, he was willing to say it aloud. Trevor spoke of her 20s, of the marriage that was never acknowledged, of the child whose existence had been pushed aside. He described the decisions Meghan made, the silences she demanded, the rewriting of her own history that allowed her to rise higher than she ever could if the truth had been known. Meghan pushed back, insisting that her past was her own to carry, that her choices were born out of survival, that ambition required sacrifice. But Harry heard something different. He heard a wife admitting, in fragments and between lines, that she had not been completely honest with him. The confrontation is most powerful not because of the accusations themselves, but because of the emotions it uncovers. Meghan is forced to confront her fear, the fear that the past she buried would one day be unearthed. Trevor is finally freed from years of silence, his words like stones lifted from his chest. And Harry, the man who left everything behind for love, feels the ground beneath him shift as the woman he defended so fiercely is revealed to be more complex, more flawed, more secretive than he ever imagined. There is also the question of motive, and in the confrontation, Harry asks it directly. Why now? Why speak after all these years? Trevor's answer is simple. Because silence had become unbearable. Because the world deserved to know. Because Harry himself deserved to know. The simplicity of the answer gives it power. Trevor doesn't frame himself as a hero, doesn't demand sympathy. He simply states that truth cannot be buried forever. For Meghan, this moment is one of exposure but also defiance. She argues that her past does not define her, that her decisions were her own, and that she has every right to protect herself from the judgment of others. But her words, strong as they are, cannot erase the fact that she had hidden the very things now being laid bare. And Harry, listening, cannot ignore the silence that preceded her defense, the flicker of recognition in her eyes when Trevor spoke the words she hoped never to hear again. The confrontation ends not with resolution, but with fracture. Trevor leaves, his purpose fulfilled, his truth spoken. Meghan remains shaken, her composure cracked in ways no tabloid headline ever managed. And Harry, silent now, stands between them both, caught in the ruins of trust. The confrontation has not destroyed the marriage yet, but it has planted a seed of doubt, one that will grow with each passing day. Opens in the aftermath of the confrontation, a quiet that feels heavier than any storm. Meghan Markle returns to her private sanctuary, her Los Angeles home, a place she had carefully curated as a shield from the chaos of the outside world. The walls, adorned with art and photographs, seem suddenly smaller, more confining, as if the very air has thickened with the weight of Trevor Engelson's revelations. She moves through the rooms with a measured, almost mechanical grace, but inside, a tempest rages. Her thoughts are a tangle of fear, regret, and calculation. Every memory of her 20s, every choice she thought she had buried, now presses against the fragile veneer of control she has maintained for so long. Meanwhile, Harry struggles to process the encounter. The man who has faced scrutiny, betrayal, and the relentless gaze of the press is now confronted with a personal revelation that shakes him in ways the public cannot see. He retreats to a quiet corner of the estate, pacing in circles, replaying Trevor's words in his mind. Each sentence spoken, each intimate detail revealed, carries with it the weight of a new reality. The Meghan he thought he knew, the woman he married believing in her candor, is now layered with secrets that challenge everything he has built his trust upon. His questions multiply, echoing in the empty rooms. Why was this kept from him? What else has she concealed? And, perhaps most piercingly, how can the future they imagined together survive this? To understand the gravity of Trevor's disclosures, it is essential to trace the origin of Meghan's secret first marriage. In her early 20s, Meghan was a rising actress in Los Angeles, navigating a world both alluring and perilous. Ambition drove her forward, but it was tempered by caution, by a recognition that the industry she had chosen was merciless. During this period, she formed a connection with a man whose identity has remained largely obscured until now. Their union was private, uncelebrated, and deliberately shielded from the public eye. In a world obsessed with image, Meghan chose invisibility for this chapter of her life, a decision that would reverberate decades later. Trevor's revelations confirm what had long been whispered but never substantiated. Meghan had not only married once before him, but had also borne a child in that early union. The implications are staggering. For the public, this is a revelation that upends the carefully constructed narrative of Meghan's life. For Harry, it is a personal shockwave, challenging the foundation of his relationship and demanding a recalibration of trust. And for Meghan herself, it is a reckoning she cannot control, a truth that escapes the boundaries she so meticulously set. The next few days are a tense ballet of appearances and private confrontations. Meghan must navigate not only her own emotions, but also the inevitable leaks to the press, the speculation that begins to swirl like a storm in Los Angeles. Every phone call, every message, every interaction carries a heightened significance. Those closest to her observe the subtle shifts, the furrowed brow, the guarded tone, the calculated pauses, as she grapples with the fallout. Friends report late-night calls to advisors, whispered conversations in hushed tones, the frantic attempt to contain what may already be uncontrollable. Harry, too, is caught in the crossfire. His protective instincts clash with his desire to understand, his love for Meghan now intersecting with the need for clarity. He questions the timeline, the motives, and the silence. Why was Trevor never mentioned? Why did Meghan allow this chapter of her life to remain hidden? And most importantly, how will this revelation affect their children, their public image, and their future together? The questions are endless, and the answers, if they exist, are obscured by layers of secrecy, fear, and self-preservation. During this period, media speculation accelerates. Rumors spread, fueled by unnamed sources and speculative commentators, each narrative more sensational than the last. Headlines question Meghan's honesty, her past decisions, and the implications for her marriage. Analysts dissect every interview, every public appearance, searching for cracks in her composure, signs of evasiveness, and hints of guilt. The scrutiny is relentless, but Meghan's response is calculated. She chooses silence in public, allowing the storm to swirl around her while privately strategizing with advisors and legal counsel. At the same time, Trevor Engelson's role becomes more complex. He is no longer simply the man who lived a chapter of Meghan's life. He is now the keeper of truths that could reshape public perception, affect royal dynamics, and challenge the narrative Meghan had carefully cultivated. His motivations are scrutinized. Some suggest revenge, others claim a desire for closure, yet others speculate on a sense of justice. Trevor himself maintains a measured stance, emphasizing that his intent is not to harm, but to reveal the truth as he knows it, a truth that cannot remain buried indefinitely. As the days unfold, the emotional landscape shifts. Meghan grapples with guilt, not for her choices at 20, but for their consequences decades later. The tension with Harry intensifies, yet it is tempered by love, by a shared history, and by a recognition of the complexities of human experience. Trust, once considered unassailable, now requires rebuilding. Conversations grow longer, more pointed, and imbued with an urgency that reflects the stakes at hand. Every disclosure, every admission, is a step toward reconciliation or further fracture. The chapter also explores the psychological weight of secrecy. Living with hidden truths is not merely a matter of memory, but of identity. Meghan's carefully curated persona, shaped over years of public scrutiny and personal ambition, now confronts the reality that her past cannot be fully controlled. The revelation of a secret child and a first marriage challenges not only her public image, but also her understanding of self. It forces introspection, a confrontation with choices made under different circumstances, and an acknowledgement that the consequences of secrecy extend far beyond the individual. By the end of Chapter 7, the narrative tension reaches a subtle crescendo. Meghan and Harry are left to navigate the uncharted waters of revelation, trust, and reconciliation. Trevor Engelson's role as both catalyst and witness is cemented, his actions rippling outward in ways that will continue to affect relationships, perceptions, and the unfolding story. The emotional landscape is fraught, the stakes are high, and the path forward remains uncertain. This chapter leaves viewers grappling with questions of loyalty, truth, and the complex interplay between past and present, setting the stage for the dramatic developments to come in the next section. Chapter 8 begins in the quiet tension of aftermath, a world that seems both familiar and unrecognizable to Meghan Markle. The revelations delivered by Trevor Engelson have unsettled her carefully constructed life, stirring echoes of choices long thought buried. She wakes to the soft Los Angeles sunlight filtering through her bedroom windows, but the warmth is hollow, unable to dispel the chill of uncertainty. Every detail from Trevor's visit, every word he uttered at her doorstep, replays relentlessly in her mind. It is a storm she cannot outrun, and for the first time in years, Meghan feels truly exposed, not just to the public, but to the intimate circle of those she loves most. Harry, meanwhile, is in a state of quiet agitation. He has spent the previous night pacing the secluded rooms of their residence, phone in hand, hovering between reaching out to Meghan and trying to process the implications of Trevor's disclosures. He rereads the messages exchanged, recalling their early courtship and the trust that seemed unshakable. The question that haunts him is not just about Meghan's past, but about how that past intersects with the present, with their family, and with the legacy they are building. The weight of expectation, both personal and public, presses down on him as he searches for clarity in a situation where answers are as elusive as the secrets themselves. The chapter delves into the shadowed corridors of Meghan's early 20s, the period when she entered a secret marriage in Los Angeles. At the time, she was ambitious, driven, and navigating a city defined by reinvention and secrecy. The man she married first was a figure largely absent from public awareness until now, yet he played a pivotal role in shaping her formative adult years. Their marriage, though brief, was significant, a private bond formed in a world where privacy was already a scarce commodity. Meghan's decision to keep this chapter hidden was informed by a desire to protect herself, to control her narrative in a society obsessed with the public lives of women, particularly women on the path she had chosen. Trevor Engelson's confrontation brings this concealed past to the forefront. He reveals not only the existence of the marriage, but also the existence of a child, a secret that Meghan had long considered safely tucked away. The implications are immense. For Meghan, it is a collision of past and present, where decisions made with youth and hope intersect with the reality of a life built on careful storytelling. For Harry, it is an unexpected challenge, a revelation that complicates the understanding of the woman he married and the family they are striving to nurture together. The emotional tension is compounded by the ever-present gaze of the media, which waits eagerly for any hint of scandal or misstep. In the days following Trevor's disclosure, Meghan and Harry engage in a series of private, intense conversations. These discussions are not mere exchanges of information, but negotiations of trust, emotional inventories where each revelation carries the weight of consequence. Harry presses for understanding, questioning motives, timelines, and the choices that led to the secrecy. Meghan, in turn, explains the context of her early years, the pressures she faced as a young actress in Los Angeles, and the reasons she believed discretion was necessary. These conversations are laden with emotion, frustration, sorrow, defensiveness, and love intertwined in complex ways. Every statement, every hesitation, is scrutinized for sincerity, every pause filled with unspoken tension. Chapter 8 also examines the broader ramifications of the revelation. In the digital age, where personal histories are dissected in public forums and every secret is vulnerable to exposure, Meghan's past cannot remain private indefinitely. The story spreads quickly through media channels, fueled by speculation, gossip, and the natural curiosity surrounding the lives of the globally recognized. Analysts, commentators, and social media users weigh in, dissecting timelines, photos, and interviews in an effort to reconstruct the concealed chapters of her life. The narrative grows, morphs, and in some cases exaggerates, reflecting the fragility of personal truth in a world that thrives on sensationalism. The chapter also explores the psychological dimension of living with hidden truths. Meghan's secrecy was not merely a strategy. It was a mechanism for survival in an industry and society that often punishes deviation from prescribed narratives. Keeping her first marriage and child concealed allowed her to construct a public identity that was coherent, aspirational, and strategically aligned with her goals. Yet, the revelation now forces her to confront the consequences of concealment, where past decisions resonate in the present, affecting trust, perception, and the bonds of love. As the media frenzy intensifies, Harry must navigate a delicate balance between private loyalty and public scrutiny. He is aware that his reactions, his statements, and his silence all carry weight far beyond their immediate circle. He contemplates the impact on their children, on the institutions they are associated with, and on the public's perception of both him and Meghan. The intersection of personal betrayal and public exposure creates a unique pressure, one that challenges his capacity to act decisively while maintaining composure. Amid this turmoil, Trevor Engelson's role remains pivotal. He is not only a bearer of truth, but a living reminder of a chapter Meghan had chosen to erase. His presence underscores the reality that the past, no matter how deeply buried, has a persistent way of re-emerging. His motivations, whether for closure, honesty, or a sense of moral duty, add a layer of complexity to the unfolding drama. Each interaction, each recounting of events, has the potential to reshape public narratives and personal relationships alike. By the end of Chapter 8, Meghan and Harry face the sobering realization that their lives have shifted in ways that cannot be undone. The revelation of a secret marriage and child is more than a headline. It is a seismic event that reverberates through their personal and public worlds. Trust, perception, and familial bonds must now be recalibrated in the shadow of truths that have long been hidden. The chapter closes with a sense of anticipation, the audience left to grapple with questions of forgiveness, understanding, and the resilience required to navigate a life where past and present collide so dramatically. Chapter 9 opens with a palpable tension, a quiet before the storm that neither Meghan nor Harry can ignore. The revelation of Meghan's early secret marriage continues to reverberate, stretching across their private lives and into the public domain in ways neither of them could have anticipated. For Harry, the challenge is not merely processing the information, but understanding the implications it carries for their shared life. Each new day brings with it the looming question of how to reconcile the woman he married with the secrets she kept. Trust, once taken for granted, now requires deliberate rebuilding, a painstaking process that demands patience, empathy, and courage. Meghan, meanwhile, is navigating her own emotional labyrinth. The resurfacing of memories from her early 20s brings both nostalgia and regret. The life she led during that time, the decisions she made, and the relationships she formed, all of it feels simultaneously distant and immediate. The man she was married to first, now reintroduced into her story through Trevor Engelson's disclosures, represents a part of herself that she had tried to compartmentalize. The realization that this past is no longer private, that it now intersects with the present, forces Meghan into a profound reckoning. She must confront the ways in which her early choices have shaped her identity, her relationships, and the narrative she has meticulously curated. Chapter 9 also explores the reactions of their inner circle. Close friends, advisors, and family members become key players in the unfolding drama, each responding according to their understanding of the situation and their loyalties. Some offer support, emphasizing the importance of transparency and communication, while others grapple with shock, disappointment, or curiosity. These varied responses create a web of interpersonal dynamics that Meghan and Harry must navigate carefully. Every conversation is charged, every interaction loaded with unspoken expectations and judgments, highlighting the complex interplay between personal relationships and public scrutiny. As the story develops, media coverage intensifies, adding a layer of complexity to the already fraught situation. Reporters, social media commentators, and gossip columnists dissect every known detail of Meghan's early life, speculating on motives, timelines, and the potential existence of her child from the first marriage. Headlines, often sensationalized, amplify the emotional stakes, transforming personal history into public spectacle. Meghan must grapple not only with the personal ramifications of her past, but also with the relentless gaze of a global audience that is eager for drama and scandal. The constant scrutiny becomes an additional pressure point, testing her resilience and forcing her to confront the intersection of privacy and public life. Within this turbulent environment, Meghan and Harry attempt to re-establish boundaries, defining what aspects of their lives remain private and how to navigate the inevitable questions that arise. The challenge is compounded by the fact that the revelation touches not only their personal history, but also the family they are raising together. Concerns about their children's exposure to public speculation and the impact on their upbringing add an extra layer of urgency. Harry and Meghan are compelled to make decisions that prioritize both truth and protection, balancing the need for honesty with the necessity of shielding their children from the disruptive forces of public curiosity. Chapter 9 also delves into the psychological dimensions of hidden truths and revealed secrets. Meghan's initial secrecy, while a protective measure, now appears as a double-edged sword. The mechanisms she employed to control her narrative, careful omissions, selective storytelling, and personal discretion, have delayed confrontation but not eliminated consequence. The emotional burden of carrying unspoken truths is evident in both Meghan and Harry's behavior, manifesting as tension, caution, and moments of vulnerability. The chapter examines how long-held secrets, once uncovered, can reshape relationships, influence self-perception, and recalibrate the dynamics of trust and intimacy. Trevor Engelson's unexpected role continues to exert influence. His willingness to confront Meghan directly and disclose information she had hoped would remain private underscores the inescapable nature of the past. His presence is a reminder that history, no matter how deliberately concealed, has a way of resurfacing. The motivations behind his actions, whether rooted in a desire for honesty, personal closure, or a sense of moral responsibility, add nuance to the unfolding narrative. Each encounter with Trevor brings new layers of complexity, forcing Meghan and Harry to engage with aspects of her life that had been long buried. The chapter transitions into the public fallout, highlighting how quickly narratives can shift and evolve in today's media landscape. As news outlets report on the revelation, public opinion becomes a fluid, often volatile force. Social media amplifies reactions, ranging from outrage to sympathy, creating a dynamic in which perception and reality often blur. Meghan and Harry must navigate not only the immediate emotional impact of the disclosure, but also the broader societal response, which carries implications for their reputation, public engagements, and long-term narrative control. By the end of Chapter 9, the emotional intensity reaches a crescendo. Meghan and Harry, while still processing the implications, begin to confront the path forward. The revelation of a secret marriage and child is no longer a singular event. It is a catalyst that reshapes their understanding of each other, their family, and the scrutiny they face from the world. The chapter closes on a note of cautious determination, a recognition that while the past cannot be changed, the way they respond to it will define their shared future. Their journey is far from over, and the audience is left on the edge of anticipation, aware that the next chapters will delve even deeper into the entanglements of trust, identity, and public perception.